Do you know how wet your watercolor paper is? I suggest that is a question you should ask yourself every time you're about to put your brush to the paper. The amount of water that is on the paper as you apply your paint has a huge impact on the results you will get in your watercolor painting. And most beginning watercolor artists are completely unaware of this important factor. In this video, I'm going to share with you an exercise you can do to develop your awareness of the wetness of your watercolor paper and how you can use this awareness to get the results you want in your paintings. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to my studio. My name is Kris. This channel is all about tools, tips, and tutorials for growing in watercolor. In addition to the videos on this channel, I have a growing catalog of free and premium resources on my website. Check it out at studio.krisdebruine.com. But now let's get back to the question at hand. Do you know how wet your watercolor paper is? We're going to paint this series of 3 evergreen trees. I love evergreen trees, by the way, because I just happen to live in the greenest and most beautiful part of the United States. And I look at these trees outside my window every day. Anyways, even if you don't have these trees where you live, this is an excellent exercise for developing your paper wetness awareness. As you can see here, the paintings of these 3 trees look completely different. However, you might be surprised to learn that I used exactly the same brush technique to paint these 3 trees. The first tree on the left was painted on wet paper, very wet paper. The second tree was painted on damp paper, and the third tree was painted on completely dry paper. In the first example, the water and paint on the brush flowed into the already wet paper, creating these lovely soft and diffused edges. In the second example, the paint and water on the brush moved into the fibers of the paper a little bit, but not as much as in the first example on the left. And finally, in the third example on the right, the shape of the tree is characterized by hard, sharp edges all the way around. This third tree was painted on completely dry paper. When paint and water leave the brush onto dry paper, they don't flow. They don't move. They stay where you put them and create hard edges. Understanding the way watercolor paint reacts to different levels of paper wetness is an essential skill. In addition to creating the different effects I've shown you here, this knowledge also helps you to avoid creating blooms or quote-unquote cauliflowers, which can be undesirable blemishes in your watercolor paintings. These happen when you are applying wet paint onto already wet paper and the amount of water in the brush exceeds the amount of water on the paper. This imbalance of water ratio causes the water on the brush to flow into the areas on the paper with less water, pushing aside the pigment and thus creating the bloom. Understanding these reactions is so important. Okay, let's go through this exercise now and let me show you how to replicate these 3 trees in watercolor. To begin, get your watercolor paper and tape it down to your board. This is 140-pound, 100% cotton, cold press watercolor paper. I've taped it down and divided it into 3 sections, and now I'm labeling those sections wet, damp, and dry. Next, I grab a natural sponge and I soak it with pure, clean water and bring it back and wet the first 2 sections of my watercolor paper, those 2 areas that are labeled wet and damp. I'm not going to get any water on that third section labeled dry. I've gone back to the water, got a bit more clean water on there, and I'm really making sure this is really heavily soaked with water. Next, I'm going to grab my timer and set it to about 3 minutes. I want to let the water really soak into the paper for just a few minutes. If you take a good close look at the paper right after applying the water, you're going to see there's a real sheen to the paper. It's quite wet, but again, we want to let this soak in just for a few minutes. While I'm waiting for that paper to dry just a bit, I'm going to mix up a variety of greens on my palette. I'm using indanthrone blue and green gold. These are all Daniel Smith colors. Probably using a little bit of French ultramarine, some of my yellows. I want to neutralize some of the colors so they have a bit more of a neutralized green, a grayish green. So I might bring in some browns, burnt sienna or yellow ochre, and just a variety of greens on my palette. The reason I do that is most trees are not all one color. They're not all just a solid mass of a certain color of green. There's a variety of greens in those trees, and I want to be able to easily go and pick different colors of green as I paint my trees. So I need all those colors mixed ahead of time. Now I'm going to grab that sponge again. It is soaking wet, and I'm going to apply another coat of water to this first section. I want the wet section of the paper to be very wet and to be glistening with water. Okay, now I'm ready to start painting my first tree. I've got my Princeton Aqua Elite number 12 long round with a great sharp point. I'm going to be painting the tree just in this first section that is labeled wet. This is wet on wet technique, and as I begin my tree, I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna and paint that trunk of the tree. And if you look closely, already you can see how the paint is just spreading out into the paper. Because the paper is very wet, and I'm painting with water and pigment from my brush, that water from the brush is just flowing out into the already very wet paper and creating very soft and diffused edges. I am going back to the palette, picking up different colors of paint, because once again, the colors of these trees is not just a singular color of green, but a variety of greens. There's some very warm greens at the top of the tree, and then as I progress down, bring in some cooler, bluer shades of green. The technique I'm using here is to use the tip of the brush and just really kind of almost with squiggly lines. I'm just dancing over the surface of the paper. I don't want to make uniform shapes. I want it to be more organic looking, and so just a variety. I'm leaving some of the white to show through the tree in places, and now I'm going to come back with a little bit thicker paint and a little bit of darker color and just add it throughout the tree. This technique, I'm going to use the same kind of technique on all three trees. Now, in the time it has taken me to paint that first tree, this second section has dried even more. I'm going to pick it up, though, and look at it at an angle, and I can see whether or not it is in the damp stage or if it's still pretty wet. You want the paper in the damp stage, you want it to be cool to the touch. It's obviously still wet, but it's not glistening with water. There's no pooling water and that kind of thing. So I'm taking that brown color again and just, in a sense, almost experimenting with the paper. Is it in the damp stage or not, or is it still pretty wet? It's actually, the colors you can see here, is still spreading pretty dramatically when I apply it to the paper. So I'm going to wait for about another minute or so and let this paper dry a bit more. All right, I have let the paper dry for about another minute, and I feel like it's at that damp stage now, in between real wet and completely dry. And now as I start to apply this first color, you can see that while the paint is spreading a little bit as it hits the paper, it's not really blending or blurring into the paper fibers. It's staying where I put it a little bit more than with the first tree. This is what a wet on damp paper effect will look like. Again, I'm using the exact same technique. I'm using the tip of the brush. I'm coming in with different colors, pretty much using the exact same consistency of paint in terms of the water to paint ratio. But despite the fact that I'm using the exact same paint, exact same technique, you can see the paint is not blurring and it's not moving across the paper in the same way as it was in that first tree. So again, we can see that the amount of water on the paper makes a real big difference in terms of the techniques that you can get in watercolor, and you need to be aware of that because it can make a real difference in the outcome of your painting. Now I'm ready to paint that last tree. This is going to be a wet on dry technique. The paper here in the third section is completely dry. And so I'm going to take my paint. I'm using the same brush, the same consistency of paint, but as I put that paint on the paper, as you can see here, look at that dry brush effect. Again, the paper is very dry, and so the brush and the paint on the brush kind of skips over the surface of the paper. And as I put it down, I get completely hard edges. I'm painting with the same technique, with the same consistency of paint, but now the paint doesn't move on the paper at all. Wherever I put it, the paint stays there. It doesn't flow into the fibers of the paper. It doesn't blur. It doesn't really blend. And I get a lot of hard edges throughout the tree. Now I'm going to speed this up just a bit as I use pretty much the same technique throughout the entire tree from the top to the bottom. I switch up the colors, get a variety of tone and color. And now I finish up by adding a little bit more dark paint, emphasizing the trunk in a few places, and I think I'll even put in a little bit of a shadow, cast shadow, underneath the tree. And I'm done. Now let's take a little closer look at these three paintings. The first one was painted on a very wet paper, and you can see how much the paint has spread into the paper, creating very soft diffused edges. In the second example, while the paint has spread and created some soft edges there, it's not quite as much as with the first tree. And now in this third tree, completely hard edges. Wherever I put the paint, that's where it stayed. So I get three entirely different looking trees using the same technique, and the only variable is the wetness of the paper. So this is something we really need to be aware of if we're going to develop our skills in watercolor. I encourage you to complete this demonstration yourself. In fact, try completing the exercise several times like I did. Here are some of my results. I completed these trees several times until I got it right. As you do this, you will learn how watercolor pigments react differently to different paper conditions. You will, as a result, learn how to better apply paint to paper and get the results you want. And I would dare to say that until you develop this paper wetness awareness, you will struggle to get the results you want. It really is that important. I hope you've enjoyed painting along with this exercise. If so, please like, share, and comment on this video. I would also love it if you subscribe to my channel as well. Your feedback and partnership really do help improve this channel and help me reach more people. Once again, if you haven't done so already, check out my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. I have tons of resources there to help you advance in watercolor. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and keep on growing in watercolor.